You're not on the invite, Kimberly. That's what Lisa from Ops said when I showed up to the quarterly roadmap sync, the same sync I'd led for the past 6 years. She didn't even look up from her stupid bedazzled tumbler, just kept clacking her acrylics against the lid like she was auditioning to be a wind chime. I stood there for a beat, waiting for anyone, to speak up. But the new VP, Trent, just smiled that smug used car salesman's smile, clapped me on the shoulder like a high school football coach, and said, "Don't worry, we've got the vision stuff handled. You focus on the plumbing." The plumbing? That's what he called the system's architecture and integration protocols I'd spent 15 years perfecting. The plumbing that underpinned the $80 million multi-year contract with Crosswell International, the client we landed because I built the original compliance model that passed their due diligence with zero flags. The same client who still asked for me by name on every call. The only reason we even had a $80M deal. But yeah, sure. I'll go unclog a metaphorical toilet while you innovate with your frat pack of mediocre sycophants. Let me be clear, this wasn't ego. I didn't care about PowerPoint or posturing. I cared about execution. And until Trent rolled in with his gelled hair and imported buzzwords, execution had been mine. I'd spent the better part of a decade holding together a tech stack that was one Slack meltdown away from a nervous breakdown, rewriting outdated API contracts in hotel rooms at midnight, and walking execs off the ledge when timelines slipped. I never missed a delivery. I never burned a client. I was the glue. Everyone knew it, even if they pretended not to. But lately, the glue had gone invisible, and not by accident. Ever notice how death by 1,000 cuts never comes with a dramatic moment? It's just little things. A dashboard you suddenly don't have access to. A thread you're no longer looped into. A junior engineer asking if you're still running point on the migration because he heard otherwise. I played it cool. Said nothing. Made notes. Because I know a phase out when I see one. This wasn't my first rodeo. It was just the first time they were dumb enough to think I'd go quietly. I didn't, but not loudly either. And hey, if you're still listening right now and you're not subscribed, I'll say this. It costs nothing to tap that button, but it means everything to the team that brings these stories to life. Same goes for like, it helps more people find us, and trust me, this story, it only gets better from here. Back to Trent, the man with all the charm of a wet napkin and the IQ of 1-2. He came in swinging, talking about synergy realignment and culture metrics, like he'd eaten a word cloud for breakfast. Within 2 weeks, he'd renamed all the project folders, reassigned leads based on visibility goals, and held a town hall where he said the phrase paradigm shift 5 times. 5, I counted. Somewhere in between cutting funding for technical QA and adding a kombucha keg to the break room, he decided my job was non-scalable. His words, not mine. Be clear, I didn't need their approval. I already had something better, trust. Crosswell trusted me. Their CTO still sent me holiday cards. Their legal team asked for my opinion when their own vendors pitched contracts. And most importantly, their general counsel, Andrea Lynn, had once told me over drinks at a conference that the only reason they hadn't pulled out of Adventech after the last exec shakeup was because you're still there, Kimberly. Remember her saying that? I remember everything. So while Trent played startup cosplay, I stayed quiet and watched. They thought I was checked out. Truth was, I was dialed in. I knew every clause of that MSA like scripture. I was the one who had drafted the original skeleton in Word, redlined it with legal, and negotiated its final form with Crosswell's lawyers over 3 weeks of late-night Zoom calls. There's a clause, buried down in section 4.3b, subpoint Roman 2 that no one else bothered to read. It was my clause, my shield, my trapdoor, they just didn't know it yet. I didn't plan revenge. That would have been unprofessional. I simply maintained awareness, quiet power. I kept access to the AV systems in the breakout rooms because I was the one who had lobbied for those upgrades in the first place. I still had backend permissions because no one ever updated the admin matrix. I wasn't hacking anything. I was just watching and waiting. So when I walked past Breakout C1 Monday morning and heard my name, followed by the words "we'll phase her out after the client signs," I didn't flinch. Didn't stop, just smiled to myself, because Breakout C, it's voice activated. And I'd built the trigger command into the ceiling mic 3 years ago. One tap, that's all it took, they whispered. The room listened, and I walked away knowing the glue had teeth. The dashboard went blank on a Tuesday. I logged in like I always did, same coffee-stained keyboard, same 6:12 a.m. routine. Only this time the project dashboard didn't load. Just a sterile gray box with the message, access denied. Please contact admin, like I was a stranger in a house I built with my own hands. I tried the backup link, then the staging mirror. Nothing. I pinged our PM, Jules, who replied with a nervous smile emoji and nothing else. That emoji told me more than any meeting could have. 5 minutes later, I was kicked out of the Slack thread too. Not archived, not marked inactive. Just gone, like I never existed. Like 15 years of never missing a deadline, never screwing a client, and never once taking sick leave during a rollout could be erased with one click and a snide middle manager with a god complex. I didn't cry. That's not my style. But I did sit back in my chair and stare at the crack in the ceiling tile above my monitor, the one I used to joke looked like Michigan flipping the bird. Trent was the new map now, and he was drawing borders. By 9 o'clock a.m., I'd confirmed the pattern. My calendar invites were gone. My name had vanished from the delivery plan. Someone had reassigned my junior Mason to a different lead without looping me in. I walked past the war room and saw my whiteboard notes replaced with a color-coded mural that looked like someone ate a box of crayons and threw up synergy. Nobody said anything. Nobody looked at me. They were all pretending I'd just taken a really long lunch break and never came back. I grabbed a coffee, black, no sugar, and headed back to my desk. That's when Mason slinked over, eyes darting like he was passing a note in church. He whispered, "I probably shouldn't say this, but Trent told us you're being transitioned. They're waiting till after the Crosswell renewal to make it official." Transitioned? What a polite little euphemism for tossed aside like an expired security badge. I thanked Mason, not his fault. Kid was sharp and, more importantly, kind. He didn't have to tell me, but he did. That was his mistake. That was their mistake. After lunch, I took the long way back from the cafeteria. Not because I was hungry, I wasn't. I just needed to walk off the shake in my hands. I cut through the west hallway, past the bank of glass-walled breakout rooms. I wasn't snooping. Honestly, I was too damn tired to care. But habit made me look through the clear panel of breakout C. Inside, Trent and his tag-along from HR Jen, plus that smarmy little troll from Biz Dev Evan. They were leaned in, close, like boys plotting in a treehouse. I was about to pass when I caught my own name, said low, like it might trigger a curse. "We'll phase her out after the client signs," Trent muttered, smug and casual like we were talking about removing gum from a shoe. Jen chuckled. Evan said, "Smart, less noise, smart, less noise." They didn't know I was 10 feet away. Didn't know the mic above them was still live, still synced, still logging every word for meeting recap enhancement. A feature I proposed, a system I configured, a database I still had root access to. My rage didn't show, not in my face, not in my pace. I kept walking, even smiled at the receptionist on the way back like nothing had changed. But something had, because while they whispered like petty tyrants planning a paper coup, I whispered something too, barely audible. Meeting note start. Save to private folder. Tag, Crosswell. And just like that, breakout CTKS mic picked up every word. With time stamps, with metadata. With audio so clear you could hear Jen's iced latte clinking against her teeth. I didn't need revenge, I needed leverage. And now I had it, because that file wasn't going to HR. It wasn't going to IT. It wasn't going to my manager, who once told me I was too quiet for leadership. No, that file was going to the one person in this entire mess who actually mattered. The one person who would see it for what it was, a breach. Andrea Lynn, General Counsel, Crosswell International. We'd shared a bottle of Pinot at a security summit once and spent the entire evening tearing apart clause language like it was bad poetry. She respected sharp edges and tighter contracts. She would understand, so I pulled the audio, downloaded it clean, wiped the log entry, scrubbed the metadata. I left no trace. 15 years in ops made me many things, but above all, it made me precise. And that night, without fanfare, I composed a blank email. No subject, no body, just an attachment. Then I entered one address, alin@gccrosswellintel.com, and hit send. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was anxious, but because I was wired. You ever feel that exact, electric clarity that hits when you stop pretending? When the mask slips off and you remember you don't owe anyone grace? That was me, sitting in my dim little kitchen at 2:38 a.m. Laptop glowing, heart steady, sipping gas station wine like it was sacramental. 15 years of loyalty boiled down to a whisper behind a glass wall. But that whisper, it was now a weapon, and I was no longer interested in keeping it sheathed. The AV suite was my domain once, back before Trent and his PowerPoint cheerleaders rolled in with their innovation pamphlets and started renaming things like toddlers with a label maker. I'd pushed for those rooms, negotiated the vendor discounts myself, oversaw the install. Every mic, every panel, every line of firmware. Back then, the execs thought it was overkill. Now it was their confessional. I logged into the control panel through a backdoor I never documented. Not because I was sneaky, because no one asked. They never asked how things worked, just that they kept working. They loved the magic but never cared for the magician, so I made sure the magician always had the last trick. Breakout C, session ID 421 BLX. Timestamp 104:16 p.m. to 1:21:47 p.m. That's where the betrayal lived. I queued it up, headphones on, waveform dancing like a heartbeat. Phase her out after the client signs, that was Trent. Smug, certain. Jen tittered like she'd just heard a dirty joke. Evan mumbled something about backfilling optics. It was all there. The casual conspiracy, the smirking malice, the quiet confirmation that my life's work was a bullet point on someone else's strategy deck. I downloaded the file, raw and untouched. Then I opened my tools, stripped the metadata, renamed the file to something boring, Q2 QA Sync Review AV, edited the header to scrub user credentials, reset the internal timestamps to a previous week. No breadcrumbs, no audit trail. I hesitated exactly once. HR, I hovered over the compliance ticketing portal, fingers tingling above the keyboard. That was the proper channel, right? That's what the policy said. If you witness internal misconduct, report to HR or your direct supervisor. Yeah, and then HR would review it. Spend 3 weeks consulting with legal and quietly issue me a performance improvement plan while Trent got a LinkedIn endorsement from the CFO. HR didn't work for people like me. They worked for the people phasing us out. I closed the portal. Then I opened a new window. Personal email, burner account. VPN on, dragged the file over. I stared at the two line for a second, not out of doubt, but out of respect. Andrea Lynn, we weren't friends, but we were professionals who'd built something real. She was Crosswell's general counsel, but she used to be a compliance shark in a white shoe firm. The kind of woman who drank neat gin, quoted subclauses from memory, and called bullshit with a smile. We'd bonded years ago during a torturous 3-week MSA negotiation where her team tried to walk back liability terms, and I held the line like a sniper in a foxhole. She respected that, called me dangerously precise. High praise coming from her. No subject, no message, just the file. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop, poured another glass of wine, and sat in silence, listening to the hum of the fridge and the faint buzz of a world about to shift. I didn't need to explain myself. That whisper in the glass room would do all the talking. My job was done. They thought I was the glue. Quiet, passive, easy to peel off. They forgot glue can also be a trap. It started with a whisper, fitting, really. A rogue comment in an engineering channel at 8:13 a.m. Anyone know why Crosswell just paused all access to the test environment? I was sipping coffee, watching the sunrise like I do every morning, my inbox clean, my calendar empty by design. I didn't answer. Just leaned back in my chair and waited. Because the thing about lighting a fuse is you don't stand over it, you walk away and let the boom handle itself. At 8:27 a.m., the Slack channels turned frantic. A thread titled #Q2 renewal final went from a ghost town to a digital riot. Legal was pinging procurement. Sales was tagging implementation. People were typing, deleting, retyping. Panic makes people forget how to spell. And then at 8:43 I saw it. Can someone add Kimberly back in? Funny. 2 days ago I was plumbing. Now I was the fire extinguisher they'd buried under the drywall. I didn't reply, not yet. I watched them scramble. Watched the private channels I was never supposed to see suddenly ping with invites. Threads I hadn't been copied on in weeks lit up with mentions like I'd been resurrected. Kimberly, can you confirm if the client expressed concerns? Kimberly, do you have any insight into the delivery lag? Kimberly, urgent, need your eyes on Crosswell escalation. Escalation, that's what they were calling it. By 9:02, the first calendar invite hit my inbox, an emergency alignment call. No subject, just urgent, I declined. Then the real news came through, not from Slack, not from Trent, not even from our shell-shocked VP of Client Relations who suddenly remembered my name. It came as a simple email from Crosswell's admin alias, addressed to legal, sales, and ops. Subject, contract review pause body, per internal compliance guidance. All renewal activities are suspended until further notice. Please route all questions through Andrea Lynn's office. Do not contact project teams directly. That was it. 67 words, no explanation, no timeline, no apology, just a full stop. The $80 million renewal, 15 months of prep, a 6-person team, 3 external consultants, and a VP bonus package already baked into the stock plan, frozen. I stared at the screen, and my phone buzzed. One message. One sender, Andrea Lynn, thank you, watch for the call, no emoji, no preamble, just calm, surgical gratitude. I didn't smile, not really. But I felt it, the shift. You ever see a chess match flip on a single move? That silent moment where the room realizes the queen isn't cornered, she's hunting? That was this. Trent, I imagine, was still in his office, furiously scribbling ideas for message framing and proactive outreach. Probably thought he could bluff his way through it. That the client would forgive a little strategic phasing if he called it leadership rotation. He didn't know yet. He didn't know that Clause 4 of the MSA, which he never read, because he doesn't read anything longer than a meme, required client pre-approval for any changes to named personnel. He didn't know that I was one of those names. He didn't know the voice recording was already logged, indexed, and archived by the very people he thought he could outmaneuver. But he'd learn. Oh, he'd learn. The building felt different that day. Even the air in the stairwell seemed charged, like the walls knew something was coming. My coworkers glanced at me differently too, not with sympathy, not with curiosity, with caution. I went about my day, updated a few internal docs, reviewed a vendor invoice I wasn't technically still responsible for, sat through a budgeting meeting like nothing was happening. Because that's the thing about power, real power. It doesn't have to shout, it just waits. The emergency legal call was set for 7:00 p.m., which was their polite way of saying, we're bleeding and don't know where the hole is. I wasn't invited, of course. Technically, I wasn't part of the renewal team anymore. But Trent, poor Trent, CC'd me on the invite thread by accident when he forwarded the agenda to half the C-suite. That's what happens when you're in panic mode. You start fumbling, forget who's supposed to be invisible. I clicked the link anyway. Camera off. Mic muted. No one noticed. They were too busy sweating through their collars and massaging their temples like that would conjure a miracle. The screen was a mosaic of forced smiles and muted curses, legal from both sides. Execs from Adventech and Crosswell, plus a handful of suits who hadn't spoken to me in 6 months but were now sipping from water bottles like it was their last drink on Earth. Then Andrea Lynn joined. All those little Zoom windows sat up straighter. She didn't say hello, didn't do the thanks for making time dance. She just looked straight into the camera and said, with surgical calm, "You need to revisit your master service agreement. Section 4. That's it, nothing else. Not even a page number. Just a sentence that landed like a pipe bomb in a prayer circle. For 2 full beats, no one moved. Then chaos. General Counsel for Adventech, Mitchell Reeves, started flipping through a thick binder like a man searching for a fire escape. One of the associates tried to whisper something and forgot they weren't muted. "Is that the personnel clause?" someone asked. "Wait, what's the specific language again?" asked another. Trent leaned forward, brow furrowed, lips moving silently as if praying to the god of HR loopholes. He was trying to remember if he'd ever read the agreement, let alone Section 4. I could have told him he hadn't. Trent doesn't read, he reacts. And right now his reaction smelled a lot like regret. Mitchell finally found it. Section 4.2b, line 6. Any substitution, removal, or reassignment of named key personnel without prior written approval from client shall constitute breach, resulting in immediate contract termination and associated penalties as defined in Schedule C. He read it out loud, stumbled over the word associated, voice cracking like he was confessing a crime in front of a jury. And there it was, my name, in bold under named key personnel. Kimberly Hartley, lead integration architect, a role they phased out 3 weeks ago. A removal they never documented. A change they never disclosed. And a breach so clear, a first-year law student could have spotted it blindfolded. Trent turned white. Not just pale, paper. His neck blotched red like an overcooked steak, eyes darting to legal like they might throw him a rope. They didn't. They were too busy realizing what this meant. The $80M renewal wasn't just paused, it was poisoned. Andrea said nothing more, she didn't have to. The silence on the call was a kind of music, not soothing, not soft, but orchestral, the sound of suits realizing they'd walked into a trap with their eyes wide open. I leaned back in my chair, off camera, watching it all unfold like a ghost in the machine. My face was blank, my hands steady. Inside, though, satisfaction curled warm and slow like whiskey in my chest. I didn't smirk, didn't celebrate. That's not how you handle this kind of victory. You just observe, like a mechanic who warned everyone not to skip the oil change, and now watches the engine seize while they try to blame the thermometer. Mitchell stammered something about intent versus execution and non-material deviation, but it was limp. Andrea cut him off with a single phrase, "We interpret Section 4 strictly. You'll hear from outside counsel tomorrow." That was the last thing she said. The call ended 3 minutes later. No wrap-up, no next steps. Just a row of gray icons blinking out one by one like lights in a sinking ship. And me? I sat there in the dark, laptop screen reflecting my face like a mirror made of consequences. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't fury or dread. I felt ready, because the clause they buried me under, I wrote it, and now it was digging me out. By Thursday morning, the building didn't feel like an office anymore. It felt like a pressure cooker with fluorescent lighting. The air was thick with something raw and sour, like panic left out in the sun. Trent's assistant was in tears by 9:15. Legal had hijacked 2 conference rooms. HR was unavailable for in-person consultations. And someone from facilities whispered that the board had scheduled a private session at 4 p.m., with security on standby. That's what a 7-figure penalty clause will do to a company. They'd underestimated Section 4. They thought it was window dressing. A dusty relic from an old contract put there by some overzealous compliance nerd. What they didn't realize, what Trent never realized, was that I was that nerd. And I'd carved that clause like a warning into the bones of the MSA years ago. Because I knew one day someone would try to cut corners with client trust. And when they did, I wanted the trap to spring hard, and spring it did. $80 million gone, not delayed, voided. Plus the auto-triggered damages, $2.75 million in liquidated penalties, payable within 60 days. And worst of all for the board, the mandatory disclosure clause. The client didn't just walk, they walked loudly. Trent tried to hold a meeting at noon, called it a path-forward conversation. Only 4 people showed up and 2 of them were interns. He stood there, tie askew, trying to explain how the personnel change had been procedural. Someone from finance asked why the board had cut his travel budget mid-quarter. He ignored the question, then tried to pivot to a whiteboard strategy. No one spoke. One intern asked if the kombucha keg was still active. By 2 p.m., HR had gone into lockdown mode. Word was they were trying to pin the breach on process ambiguity. I saw the emails. Internal ops channels started lighting up with revisionist history. Suddenly, no one had actually approved removing me from the Crosswell thread. It was a misunderstanding. We never sent a formal reassignment notice. The integration role was technically still open. Cute if it weren't so desperate. Trent blamed HR in a memo to the board. HR blamed ops in a Slack thread that somehow got leaked. Ops blamed poor visibility from sales. Sales blamed Trent and CC'd legal on every reply. Legal started each sentence with "to be clear," which is legalese for "don't you dare hang this on me." And in the middle of it all, me. They called me into a meeting at 3:11. No subject line. Just join us in conf room Delta. I walked in to find Trent, Mitchell from legal, and Sandra from the board. They didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was doing, just motioned for me to sit. Trent looked like he hadn't slept in days, deep eye bags, collar wrinkled. He opened with, "Kimberly, we'd really value your insight right now." I let the silence do some heavy lifting. Mitchell jumped in. "We're trying to reconstruct the personnel chain of events. Any documentation you can provide?" Sandra interrupted. "We just need to know if you can assist us in stabilizing the client relationship moving forward." Not formally, just consultatively. That's when I smiled, not big, just enough to let the temperature drop 3 degrees. I said, "I'll let legal handle it." Then I stood up, thanked them for the coffee I hadn't touched, and left. You could have dropped a paperclip in that room and heard it echo. Because here's the thing, the moment you stop trying to be useful to people who treated you like furniture is the moment they start realizing the furniture was holding up the roof. Outside the conference room, people watched me like I was radioactive. Slack messages kept hitting my screen like hail. "Can you advise on the audit language? Do you know who has Crosswell's vendor report key? Was this your clause? Kimberly, can we talk offline?" I responded to none of them. Board meeting started at 4. Doors closed, blinds drawn. I didn't go, I didn't need to. My part was done. The trap had sprung. The mess was theirs now, and I was just the ghost in the system, watching them try to reboot a machine they no longer understood. It was 5 years ago, almost to the day, when the Crosswell deal first hit my desk. I remember because it landed right as my furnace gave out and I was typing red lines in a wool coat, trying not to cry over frozen pipe quotes. Back then, I wasn't lead architect yet, just a senior systems analyst with a reputation for being too detailed. But that's exactly why the execs tossed the master service agreement my way. They figured I'd bleed all over the margins and hand it back clean. They were half right. I bled all right, but not for them. I'd just come off a nightmare rollout for another client, one that tanked because our sales team had promised full continuity, then reassigned the lead 2 weeks into onboarding. The client walked. My boss blamed the documentation. I spent 3 weekends cleaning up a disaster that never should have happened, so when I saw the Crosswell contract, I swore I wouldn't let it happen again. I printed the whole damn thing, 197 pages, and started marking it up with a red pen like I was grading the world's worst college essay. The original draft treated staff like chess pieces, interchangeable, disposable. Adventech reserves the right to assign or reassign personnel at its discretion. That line stuck in my throat like a bone. I crossed it out. Hard. Then I opened a blank section and started writing. Section 4. Key personnel and continuity safeguards any substitution, removal, or reassignment of named key personnel without prior written approval from client shall constitute breach. I didn't get pushback. Not at first. Legal was too focused on liability caps and indemnity language to notice. And when Mitchell finally caught it during a review round, I came armed. "This clause protects us as much as it protects them," I said. "Clients value stability. If we start shuffling people midstream, we lose trust. We lose leverage." He shrugged. "Fine. Just don't make it a habit." But I did make it a habit. A clause like that's an anchor. It says this person matters. This person cannot be replaced without a conversation. And if you're smart, you don't just write the rule. You name the players. Appendix C, named key personnel project executive Jonathan Wells, senior technical lead Martina Diaz, lead integration architect Kimberly Hartley. I typed my own name. Not out of ego, out of survival. And because Andrea Lynn, Crosswell's GC, was no idiot, she saw that clause and didn't blink. In fact, she added language reinforcing enforcement. "Trigger penalties in the event of unapproved personnel changes," she said. "We've been burned before, so have we," I replied. We shook on it, virtually of course. Her face pixelated through the screen, wine glass in hand, smiling like she knew I wasn't just protecting the client. I was protecting myself. Years passed, deals were delivered, budgets shifted, titles changed. But that clause, it sat there like a tripwire, silent, ignored, gathering dust, until Trent stumbled across it with both feet. And now, watching the building unravel from a quiet corner of the break room, I couldn't help but marvel at the foresight, at the symmetry. The very sentence they'd tried to erase me with had already been engraved by me into the foundation. People think power is loud. Titles, promotions, spotlight meetings. But power, real power, is knowing that the walls around you were built with your own hands, that every brick has your initials carved in the mortar, and that if someone tries to knock it down, well, you know exactly where the cracks will form. I didn't plan revenge. I planned resilience. And now, the clause they skipped over in every quarterly review, the name they tried to scrub from project charters, the voice they tried to mute, was all speaking louder than ever. My name still in ink. Their signatures still binding. The trap always waiting. The invite hit my inbox at 5:42 p.m. Subject line, final discussion, client termination, board access. I stared at it for a good minute, sipping stale coffee and listening to the hum of the office slowly giving up for the day. The body of the email was 2 sentences long. Per request of the client's general counsel, you're scheduling a direct call with the Advent Tech Board. Kimberly Hartley, please attend for background context. Background context. That was rich. They didn't need my context. They needed a witness. Someone to sit quietly and remind them without saying a word who had built the house they were now watching burn. I clicked accept, closed the laptop, and went home. Slept better than I had in weeks. The call was scheduled for 8 a.m. sharp. When I logged in, the gallery filled slowly. Names I hadn't seen in years. Board members with their camera angles all wrong, faces half lit, clearly dialing in from vacation homes or corporate safe houses, already bracing for blood. On the client side, Andrea Lynn, flanked by two of her legal deputies and their head of strategic procurement, Grace something. I couldn't remember her last name, but I remembered her eyes. Ice cold. On our side, Mitchell from legal, sweating like a man in confession. Trent, fidgeting with something off-screen. Sandra from the board, posture perfect, voice clipped. No HR, no ops, just the top brass and me, the ghost in the corner. Andrea was the last to speak, as always. She waited until all the preamble died, all the posturing settled into uncomfortable silence. Then she leaned forward and said, without even glancing at notes, we've lost trust. The breach is clear. We're initiating termination per Section 4. No flourish, no anger, just a clean, professional incision. Sandra tried to pivot. Andrea, I'd just like to say that this came as a surprise. No, it didn't. Andrea cut in. Not rude, just final. The clause is not ambiguous. The named personnel were reassigned without notice or approval. This triggers both the termination and the penalties. We've already briefed outside counsel. Public disclosure will be filed by end of week. Trent opened his mouth, some apology half-formed, something about intent and momentum and misalignment of roles. It didn't matter. Grace from procurement muted her mic and started typing, uninterested in the noise, and me, I said nothing. I just watched. Watched as the room twisted, writhed, shrank in on itself. Watched Trent's shoulders cave like a tent losing its pole. Watched Mitchell flip through papers that would not save him. Watched Sandra's mouth tighten as she realized this wasn't just a bad week, it was a stain that would follow the company into every future pitch deck. Andrea continued, her voice smooth as river stone. We have no further questions. This was a courtesy call. You'll receive the official termination documents today. Thank you. Then she clicked off. Her square went gray, then Grace's, then the legal deputies. Our sides sat frozen like mannequins waiting for display change. Nobody said anything. I didn't offer comfort, didn't clarify, didn't explain how the clause worked or when it had been signed. I didn't need to. They'd had all the time in the world to care. Now they had all the consequences. I closed the Zoom window, folded my laptop shut, and stared out the window of the empty conference room, watching the clouds roll across a sky that didn't care. The trap didn't just close, it finished them. And I never had to raise my voice. The room was ice. Nobody spoke as the Zoom call ended, just a soft click as Andrea's square winked out, leaving behind only dread and the low hum of the ceiling vent. The boardroom smelled like tension, like recycled breath and burnt coffee. You could hear the faint scuff of Mitchell's chair as he stood, slow and reluctant, a man walking to his own sentencing. He opened the printed MSA, one no one had touched in years, dog-eared, scribbled in the margins, binding in a way none of them had ever bothered to understand. Pages rustled like dry leaves, and then he found it. Section 4. He cleared his throat, voice shaking just enough to betray the mask. In the event of unauthorized removal of named key personnel without prior written approval from client, he began, eyes scanning quickly. The agreement shall be considered in breach, resulting in immediate termination, a liquidated damages fee of $2.75 million USD, loss of service exclusivity for a period not less than 24 months. He stopped, swallowed, and mandatory disclosure of breach to regulatory partners and public stakeholders per Schedule C. His hand, holding the paper, trembled. Oh no, he whispered. It was quiet as snowfall. Then all at once they turned to look at me, as if I could fix it, as if I might extend a rope to the very people who once shut the door behind me and called it progress. But I didn't meet their eyes, not Trent's, not Sandra's, not Mitchell's. I just reached out, calm and steady, and closed my laptop with the soft finality of a curtain drop. Nobody stopped me. I stood, nodded politely, and walked out of the room they once ruled. They didn't thank me, didn't call after me, didn't even move because they knew, they all knew. The following week I submitted my resignation. 2 lines, no flourish, no farewell email with inspirational quotes or team photos. Just effective Friday I resigned my position at Adventech. Thank you for the opportunity. No one responded. That same day, Crosswell's HR reached out directly. Andrea had already cleared the path. They wanted me not as an architect, not as a lead, but as an independent executive integration consultant on retainer. Twice my old salary, full control. My own team. Trent lasted 3 more weeks. He was never officially terminated, just reassigned, then unassigned, then gone. His company laptop was boxed up by IT on a rainy Tuesday morning and placed quietly on the reception desk. No card, no party, no kombucha toast. The press release hit a week later. Ventec regrets the breakdown of a key client partnership and is actively restructuring executive leadership in response to market volatility. The stock dipped 11%. Analysts flagged the termination clause in their SEC filing as preventable. That night, I came home to a package at my door. No return label, just a simple cream envelope tucked into a florist's sleeve. Inside, a bouquet of white lilies, eucalyptus, and one strange blue orchid. And a card for Section 4, Andrea. I laughed, first time in months. Loud, real, unexpected. Then I set the flowers on my windowsill, poured myself a glass of bourbon, and watched the city blink in the distance. Not a queen, not a villain, not a ghost. Just a woman who saw the fire coming and built the extinguisher before they ever lit the match. They whispered. I wrote the clause. Now they whisper nothing at all. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.